Your will, your way, it will be my joy to say. Your will, your way, it will be my joy to say. Your will, your way, always. Now sing it out. It will be my joy to say. Your will, your way, it will be my joy to say. Your will, your way, it will be my joy to say. Your will, your way, always. I lay me down, I'm not my own. I belong to you alone. Lay me down, lay me down. Oh, and on my heart this much is true. There's no life apart from you. Lay me down, lay me down. Oh, I lay me down, I'm not my own. I belong to you alone. Lay me down, lay me down. Oh, and on my heart this much is true. There's no life apart from you. Lay me down, lay me down. Oh, lay me down, lay me down.
Woo! Good morning, church family, here on 50 Bell Boulevard, and whatever your address is there, and on YouTube or Facebook. It's so awesome to be able to worship together. When we're together, it allows us to feel stronger. It allows us to be, be filled up. This morning I read from Hebrews chapter 11, and it just talks about all the men and women of faith from Old Testament that walked and lived and lived out their faith. I challenge you to read that this week, and if you're not like just smacked around and saying, okay, God, it's by faith, Carla, and I know that I'm living out your story and you're living out your story through me. Fill in your name. It is by faith. And find out and think about, how is God living through you?
God, I'm on my knees again. God, I'm begging, please again. I need you. Oh, I need you. Walking down the desert road, calling for my thirsty soul. I need you. Oh, I need you. Your forgiveness, it's like sweet, sweet honey on my lips. It's like the sound of a symphony to my ears. It's like holy water on my skin. When all these things I wanna know about being born
there be light. What's going on, Lehigh Acres? Welcome. So great to see all of you here today. Thank you for meeting with us. Man, how about that? Like, how great was worship, man? Woo! Yes! So great to see all of you guys. Thank you for meeting with us. Thank you for joining us. If you're joining us online, thank you for welcoming us into your home or bedroom. Hopefully not the bathroom, although I know how smartphones work. It's okay. So exciting that we have this opportunity to gather together. Y'all, we come together in this moment, and we come together as one, and there is power when we come together this way. I know many of you are carrying around burdens. I know many of you are carrying around worry and anxiety and stress and struggle and hurt and brokenness. And this is the moment in which you are to bring it all in, and put it at the foot of the cross. Jesus wants it in this moment. And when we come together as one people, when we come together as one body, when we come together as one church, there is power in this moment. And Christ will remove those things from you, and he will replace them. He will replace them with peace and love and joy and patience and kindness and goodness. And he will fill you up. So just bring those burdens, bring those worries, bring it all in this morning, wherever you are, however you can. Lay them at the foot of the cross, and Christ will redeem it. Christ will transform them, and Christ will change your life. I promise that. So I am so excited by the things that are going on right now. This morning at 8 a.m., we had a group of high schoolers that took off for our youth retreat this week. So incredible what's going on there. Normally they make the trek up to East Tennessee and go to what's called the Christ in Youth Move conference. And for obvious reasons, it wasn't a great idea to put 1,500 kids in one room together. So they did this whole move at home kind of thing. We thought it'd be pretty cool if we rented a house up in Kissimmee, took our youth up there, and just had a really intimate moment where them to get together, for them to share their burdens with one another, and for them to meet Christ. I mean, that's really what it's all about. So I hope that you will pray alongside of me this entire week, as the first half of the week is all about high school, second half of the week is all about middle school, and that we can just pray for God to show up in a really significant way, that he can change some lives, right? Because he is the God of changed life, and that's what he desires to do. So please pray for our students. Please pray for our leaders that are there as well. Derek and Lizzie are up there leading the whole charge and everything. You may want to pray for me, because that means I am here by myself, left to my own devices. Who knows what you may come into next Sunday? So it might be a little exciting. So just be in prayer this week for some great stuff to happen, for God to move in a great way. Hey, we are also at the tail end of our Kids Pack Summer Food Program, which has been incredible. Now, this was supposed to be our last week of it, but they pushed back the start of school, and we've got some leftover boxes, so we're going to do one more distribution. But last week, we packed 350 boxes. Last week, we distributed 350 boxes, which brings us just under 11,000 meals that we've been able to distribute this summer. Incredible. God is showing up. And y'all, you hear me say it time and time again, it's not just about filling bellies with a little bit of food. It's about filling a community with a lot of bit of hope. And that is the hope of Jesus. And just as we have been, we got another call last week from a mother who said, hey, I've got a special needs daughter, and I have just been so blessed by what you guys have done. She gets so excited when the boxes are passed out. She tears into it and just gets so excited by the stuff that's in it. It's been a huge blessing to us. It's been a huge blessing to our families. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Fruit is being born, right? Jesus is being spoken of in our community. We aren't just a church that says Jesus. We are a church that shows Jesus. And this is just one of those tangible ways that we are able to do that. So thank you so much for your prayers, for your support, and continue to pray that fruit comes from this work that we've been able to do. And here we are, right? We are in actually the tail end of the Faith Works series. This has been an awesome series. I hope you guys have felt some conviction from it. I know I have felt convicted from it. And it all comes down to faith works because faith works, right? Faith is calloused hands. Faith is grime and grit under your fingernails. Faith is sweat on your brow. Faith is rolled up sleeves. Faith is work boots. Faith is going to work every day. That's what our faith should look like. And at the end of all of it, God will look at us and say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." We should look forward to that day, forward to that moment, because our faith ran the course for us. So we are in the book of James. If you've been following along, we're in James chapter 5 today. We're actually going to pick up in verse 7. So I'd love for you to turn with me there to James chapter 5, verse 7. And while you're turning there, right, let me just do this again, right? Who is James? Why is this so important? James is the first pastor of the first Christian church in Jerusalem. Pretty significant to know that. James is also the half-brother of Jesus, right? But he wasn't always a firm believer in Jesus, right? He looked up at Big Bro and thought, that guy he done lost his marbles, right? Saying that he is the Messiah, saying that he has come to save all of mankind, all of humanity, to free them from their sins. And then what happened is, well, Jesus works too, right? And when Jesus works, lives get changed. And that's exactly what happened with James, is through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, James became a living, breathing, walking, changed life. And that inspired him to become that first pastor of that first Christian church there in Jerusalem. And of course, it led him even to his own grave. It led him to his own martyrdom. It led him to be killed for his commitment to Christ. And his faith really, truly does work. In the meantime, he writes this letter. And this is likely the very first book, the very first letter that was written in the New Testament, right? Before the Gospels was the book of James. And so this is the message that is permeating the ancient world. These are the messages, the many sermons that are being delivered to the ancient people. And it's all a call for their faith to be living, breathing, and active, for their faith to do work. So what does James have for us today? In James chapter 5, picking up in verse 7, here's what he says. He says, "Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke to you in the name of the Lord. As you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy." Let's hold right there. I think this is Hulk Hogan's favorite verse, right? Brother, you know what I'm talking about, right? So he just seems, okay. That was really bad, but as a pastor, I'm allowed to get away with things like that. So we all think we have it, but very few of us do. We all want it, but we definitely don't want to work for it. And when we finally do grab a hold of it, it completely changes our lives and the lives of the people around us. Now, the obvious answer there is Jesus, but the more practical answer there is patience. James continues over this thought of patience, patience, patience. And we have that old saying, right? Patience is a virtue. And we're like, oh, that sounds really cool, but what is a virtue? What does that even mean? And a virtue, simply put, is just something of high moral value, right? We all want to be moral people, and the morals that we maintain are all morals that come from our Creator. And so patience is of significant moral value, but it's something we completely struggle with, right? Patience is very unfamiliar territory in our cultural context. I want you to just think about it this way. So there are more fast food joints in our world today than there are sit-down restaurants. The microwave, it gets used well beyond that of the stove or the oven, and even the grill, right, which is my personal favorite to use. We would rather send an email. Actually, no, scratch that. We would rather send a text message, not with words, but with emojis, rather than sit down and write a handwritten note, although there's more significance and power in that handwritten note. Why? Because we are all impatient. Every vehicle that we drive that's on the road is rated in how quickly it can go from 0 to 60, when what's more important is going from 60 to 0, right? That is more important. We need to understand how to stop more so than go. This is the era of instant rice, of Easy Mac, of Snapchat, of Instagram, of speed dating, of the get-rich-quick scheme. We all want 5-minute abs, and of course, we all want to lose 10 pounds overnight. Why? Because we are all impatient, and that's exactly what our culture panders to inside of us. So there are some severe repercussions to impatience, though, right? There have actually been some studies that have been done about people who are impatient all the time. Impatience can actually lead to obesity, probably because fast food is our primary choice. It can lead to high blood pressure. It can lead to premature aging. We all know we don't want any of that, right? Most importantly, though, impatience, it leads to the dreaded brain freeze, right? You know what I'm talking about. You go over, you pick up a Pelican snowball, and you're like, I want all of that in here right now, right? And so you put it all in your mouth at one time, and then 3 seconds later, you have major meltdown in your brain as everything ceases up, and you get this massive headache, right? None of us want brain freeze, but we all want everything right now. So why are we so impatient? Well, that's because we desire something. We desire complete control over our circumstances. And patience requires us to relinquish that control. I believe that patience is total dependence on God's direction and deliverance. Total dependence on God's direction and deliverance. Who do we really give control to when we practice patience? We're really giving control over to our Creator. And when we practice patience, we begin to look a whole lot more like the one who created us. And whose image is it that we're supposed to bear to the world around us anyway? It's our Creator's, right? When you think about it, when we think about patience, what's the first thing that you think about? You probably think about the dreaded period of waiting that is involved in patience, right? Waiting, of course, is the first attribute of patience, but what James intends is certainly the waiting period, but there's something beyond waiting. It's waiting with restraint as well. Look at how he opens up this section. He says, "Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord." There's a promise in all of that. There's a promise that the Lord is coming back, right? There's a promise that Jesus will return. And if you've read the end of the Bible, right, you see he is coming back in all of his glory. And he is coming back not only merciful, but he is coming back as the judge, right? And when he comes back as the judge, you know that there's this separation that's going to occur. The goats on this side, the sheep on this side. And in any various moment, I hope you pray to stand on the side of the sheep because the goats are being led directly into the lake of fire. And that isn't a very pleasant eternity, if you know what I'm talking about. And so we're called to be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord happens, a promise in all of this. But in order to really see the full context of what James is speaking to us here in verse 7, we actually have to go back to verse 1 of chapter 5. And we see the fulfillment of what this means through the first 6 verses. Listen to what he writes. He writes, "Now listen, you rich people. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent men who were not opposing you. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord." It all flows directly into one another. Now we are a people who is a retaliatory people, but again, what we have to recognize is that the judge is coming, and it's not our job to take the gavel from his hand like we are so tempted to do all the time. Now, in the ancient world, there were 2 classes, right? We have 3 in our modern world, in America at least, but there were 2 classes. There were the ruling class, the elite, the wealthy, and they would operate up here. There were few of them, but they were mighty in what they were capable of. And then there was the working poor, which is everybody else. The marginalized, the oppressed, everyone else fell into the category of the working poor. And what the elite, what the ruling class, what the wealthy tried to do was keep the working poor underneath their thumb. And all the while in all of this, what would they do? They would rob, they would steal, they would neglect payment to the people who were out there just trying to make a living, just trying to earn enough to put food on the table for their families. But all the while, the oppression would cry out. And all the while, they were seeking to become judges of their own. The psalmist, he really sums all of this up quite well in Psalm 37. Listen to what he writes. He writes, "Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass they will soon wither, like green plants they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes." Hold fast in these times. Be patient in these times. Oftentimes it feels like in our world, in our lives, it feels like we're fighting this losing battle against the people all around us. It may feel like the people around you are able to run ahead of you only because they're depending entirely upon their own strength, upon their own will, upon their own position, upon their own authority, and they're only seeking to satisfy their own desires in all of this. But know that we're going to be called into account for everything we do, everything we think, everything we feel at the end by the only true judge, by Christ. There is power in patience because Christ is coming again. And at that moment, he will call every one of us into account. And we need to hold on to that promise because he will come. He will call us into account. So which side of that fence are you going to stand on? Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. Though a part of patience is waiting, we also need to recognize that patience isn't passive. While we're waiting, we also need to be working. Faith works because faith works. James goes on to write, "You see how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient." This was an incredibly agricultural society that James was writing to. And really, we live in an incredibly agricultural society today as well, even though we don't really recognize the fullness of what comes on the backs and through the hands and through the toil of farmers. When we think about back to who James was writing to, we have to see that there were two incredibly significant moments in the lives of those farmers. And it was in the early rains and the late rains. It was in the spring rains and it was in the fall rains. These were the rainy seasons that would come. And they didn't have all of the technology that we have today to avert water, to sprinkle fields the way that we're able to do that in order to maintain the right amounts of moisture in the ground. No, they had to rely entirely upon the rains. They had to rely entirely upon the God who brought those rains. If it rained too little, guess what happened? The harvest was scorched. If it rained too much, guess what happened? The harvest was drowned. It had to rain just enough in order to satisfy the needs. And this was not only for the well-being of the farmer and his family, this was also the well-being of the entire community, the entire region, even the entire nation was at stake. And this is James saying we must be patient just like the farmer is. We must wait, but we also must work. We must rely entirely upon God in these moments when we might not know what lies ahead. If you've ever been a farmer, or maybe even if you've ever been a gardener, you know that farming isn't just simply a set it and forget it thing, right? It's work. And it's work every blessed day. So I grew up in rural northeast Pennsylvania. And in rural northeast Pennsylvania, lots of fields, lots of farms. And there is a type of farm there that doesn't really happen in much of the other part of the world. And it's Christmas tree farms. Okay? And I know you're like, oh, Nick, that sounds magical. Christmas tree farms. I can see it already. It's like the North Pole, right? There are probably elves dancing around and singing. I don't even know if I can say elves, but I said it anyway, right? Santa's there, and there's reindeer, and it's just a glorious thing, right? No, It's the worst thing in the world. If you've ever worked on a Christmas tree farm, it's as close to hell as you can get on earth, right? That's about the extent of what it is. At the beginning of every summer, my dad would always show up and say, Dad, and he would say, son, I've got a job for you. One summer, I turned 16, he said, I've got a job for you. You're going to work on a Christmas tree farm. I said, okay, how bad can it be? For 12 hours, I walked around with some loppers, lopping off little buds of Christmas trees, making them just perfect. Why? So that in 6 months, they could be cut down, and they could end up in somebody's living room for 3 weeks, so that they could die and be thrown out for the garbage man, right? Spend all of this time, 12 hours in the heat, sweating. There were snakes, there was grass, there were bugs. It was horrible the way all of this went down. For 12 hours, I was a Christmas tree farmer, and I never went back and did it again. Not once. Y'all, we have to be patient. And the farmer certainly epitomizes what it means to wait, and he certainly epitomizes what it means to work. James leads us to this next passage then where he says, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. When I think of a farmer, I think about a farmer's hands, and I think about the incredible strength in a farmer's hands. And that's exactly what James is calling us to right here. He says, establish your hearts, and we think like, well, that happened when I was like in the womb, right? My heart is established. It is operating. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to read this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to hear this. Maybe some of you right now are thinking, please, Lord, just stop my heart so I don't have to endure any more of this. I don't know. But what James is really calling us to in this is what he's really saying is strengthen your hearts. The waiting isn't supposed to be done in weakness. And it's certainly not supposed to be done in defeat. And I know some of you are feeling that right now. I know some of you are going through a very lean time in your life. I know some of you are going through some incredibly hard transitions in your life. I know some of you right now are questioning what tomorrow might bring. But know that the strengthening of your heart, it doesn't come in weakness or defeat. No, it comes in strength and it comes in action. And that action presents itself through patience. You know, there is no greater statement perhaps of what our faith is supposed to be than this passage right here, establishing our hearts. This is our faith, right? It is strong and it works. Faith works because faith works. While we're waiting, we need to be working, but that's not the end of it either. We also need to be worshiping. And when we worship, it carries significant purpose. Patience isn't passive, but it's always purposeful. James continues, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take a look at the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. And Carla shared about many of the prophets listed there in Hebrews 11 this morning, and there are a couple that just rise to the surface. So one of my favorite prophets is the prophet Elijah, right? Elijah, slayer of the prophets of Baal. I have a small one of those in the back, in fact. And Elijah's life, we think about this incredible mountaintop moment that he had, where it was him versus the prophets of the Baal, squaring off, saying, my God is better than your God, right? This could have been on pay-per-view, how awesome this was that was going to happen. And what they did is they erected these altars made of wood, and they dug these trenches around them. And then the prophets of Baal, they called out for their God to come and to set it ablaze and to accept this offering that they were giving. And they first started in prayer, and then they started by dancing around, and then they even resorted to cutting themselves because they thought blood was a way to heighten the awareness of these fake gods. All the while, Elijah just stood by, looking at them like a bunch of fools. And then he was up. And he said, wait, this is unfair right now. I want you to bring up 3 jars of water and just douse the altar. Fill up that trench that we dug around it with water. He called upon the Lord, and just like that, he delivered. He set the whole thing ablaze. He sapped up the entirety of the water, embraced the entirety of the offering that was given to him in that moment. There was no patience needed in that moment because God showed up and God delivered. But the very next moment, just after Elijah ordered the slaying of all of those false prophets, word made its way back to the evil queen Jezebel, right? This could be a fairy tale, right? The evil queen Jezebel she shows up and she hears the story of all of this, and so she orders the head of Elijah. And Elijah ran, and he ran, and he ran, and he fled, and he ran, and he fell down at the foot of a tree, and he says, Lord, I can't do this anymore. Just take my life. Just take it right now. I'm alone. There is no one else for me. There is no one else with me. And the Lord said, just be patient. Elijah said, show me a sign. He said, reveal yourself to me. He climbed up in the cleft of a mountain, and God showed himself to him in all of his glory. Elijah faced persecution. Elijah faced oppression. Elijah even faced depression in all of this. How depressed do you have to be to call out to the Lord to simply take your life? There's incredible persecution. There's incredible suffering that the prophets of the Old Testament endure, and yet their word continues to endure even today. You look at the prophet Zechariah, book dedicated to him as well. He was persecuted, he was hated, and then he was stoned to death for the message that he delivered, a message of rebuke, a message of restore yourselves back, turn your hearts back to God. Perhaps the most oppressed prophet that we read of in the Old Testament is the prophet Jeremiah. You read through his testimony in this time when the people of Jerusalem were extremely far from the Lord their God. He was put in the stocks for the proclamations that he made. Most of the time when that happened, you were stripped naked, hands and feet put in the stocks. He was thrown into prison for the proclamations that he made, for the prophecy that he delivered. He was thrown into a mucky, miry cistern for the prophecy that he delivered in all of this. They're an example of suffering, but most importantly, they're an example of patience. If you look back to the beginning of James, he kind of sets the stage for all of this. He says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Patience leads to perfection, just as it did in the prophets. Most of these men, they never saw the fruit of their labor. They never saw the hearts of people turn back to God. They never saw the restoration. But we read their word even today. It endures because they endured. It was patient, it was passionate, it was purposeful. And it still exists and is living and is breathing in our context, in our culture, 2,700 years later, 3,000 years later. There is significance in all of this. I love what Jeremiah writes in Jeremiah 29, because this is one of those things we often press into, especially when hard times comes. He says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. We hold on to those things and we almost feel like, I'm going to hold on to that verse and immediately God's going to deliver us. But what we miss is the fact that after all of this, the Babylonians, they came in and they burned down Jerusalem. They took captive swaths, multitudes of Israelites. They led them back into slavery, and for 40 years they were held captive in Babylon. 40 years. But guess what? I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare, not for evil. Plans to give you a future and a hope. But oftentimes it just takes a little bit of patience. While we're waiting, we need to be working. We need to be worshiping. But we also need to recognize that the enemy, he wants to wreck it all. Patience is very personal. And patience is quite often painful. You see how Jeremiah then focuses his sight, or James focuses his sights then on another prophet, another man in the Old Testament. He says, behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, and how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. And when you read through the book of Job, you wonder, where is the Lord's compassion and mercy in all of this? But so often we are reading it with the wrong mindset, because the story of Job is a story of devotion to God. It's devotion despite devastation. When you flip to the story of Job, listen to how it begins. It says, there was a man by the name of Job who lived in the territory of Uz. He was blameless. He was upright. We read about his incredible wealth, how we would label him as blessed. He had 7 sons. He had 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, large number of servants. And then you see the deceiver step into the mix, standing before the throne of God, proclaiming to God that the only reason he worships you is because you've given him all of this great stuff. His wealth, his family, his health, they were all taken from him by the enemy. But he remained patient, despite even the plea from his wife when she came before him and said, just curse God and die so you can be put out of your misery. His friends, they petitioned him, and that's what the bulk of Job really is. They petitioned him to simply admit that he had done something wrong to deserve all of this. But though we don't read that Job is without sin, we read that he is blameless and he is upright. We often just misinterpret the whole story that we're given with Job. And we think that Job, he wasn't worthy of what had confronted him, this calamity that had confronted him. But the primary principle of Job is that we're called to recognize that God is worthy despite our circumstances, despite the devastation that the enemy may seek to inflict upon our lives. He will do whatever he can to pull us away from our Savior by taking away our stuff. But there was one thing that God didn't allow the deceiver to take, and that was the life of Job. He can have our stuff. He can have our wealth. He can have our health. But he can't have our life. And 2,000 years ago, our lives were paid for. The debt that we owe, satisfied. As the Son of God hung upon the cross, offering to us a wealth of riches, throwing open the storehouse, that regardless of what we may have to endure in this life, the kingdom of God awaits us. Something unimaginable. Something beyond anything we could ever begin to describe, as you find in the book of Revelation. Something glorious as we are given this incredible opportunity to commune with God himself. There's a spoiler alert here for the book of Job. Job's story ends with incredible reward. He's blessed. His 7,000 sheep, they turn into 14,000 sheep. His 3,000 camels, they turn into 6,000. His 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys, they turn into 1,000 yoke of oxen and 1,000 donkeys. He's given even more servants. He's given 7 sons and 3 daughters. And though there was certainly a hole in his heart from the 10 children that he lost, we're given this little note as well, that nowhere in the land were found women as beautiful as Job's daughters. And then we go on to read that Job lived to see his children up to the 4th generation, 140 years. Incredible reward given to this man who endured so much. Patience is about waiting, but while we're waiting, we also need to work. And while we're working, we also need to worship. And then we need to recognize that the enemy, he wants to wreck it all. But just like Job recognized, our God is worthy. And he will reward those who persevere, who remain steadfast, who embrace patience. Patience isn't passive. It carries incredible purpose. It's often painful, but it's always profitable. Great theologian and 80s rock star Axl Rose, he once wrote, "All you need is just a little bit of patience. Take things slow. Things will be just fine. You and I just need a little bit of patience." Man, if he could recognize that, don't you think we should see that even more when we gather together, when we gaze upon the cross, when we pick up Scripture, when we go to the Lord in prayer? I know some people here are carrying some burdens, some worries, some fears, some doubts, some struggles. I know you might need a little bit of prayer, or maybe wondering what your next step is with the Lord. I would love to pray for you afterward. I'll be up here in the corner. If you've got a question, you want to know what your next step is, I'd love to help you take that next step in your walk with Christ. Because He's worth it. Because He'll change your life. Because He works. Just like we're called to as well. We're going to take a moment right now, and if you're here with us, in your seat back, you'll find your communion cup. If you're at home, grab a pistachio and a Mountain Dew, whatever you have. We're going to come to the Lord in this moment of communion. This moment where God said to every one of us, guess what? You're worth it. He gathered His disciples around during the Last Supper. He broke the bread. He said, this is my body. It's been broken for you. Take and eat. He lifted up the cup. He said, this is my blood that's been shed for you. Do this whenever you gather in remembrance of me, for in it is a new covenant, forgiveness of sins. Take and drink. Let's pray. Father Grace, you are so incredibly good to us. Despite our lack of patience, despite a culture of impatience, you are so patient with us. You desire us in your kingdom. And you showed us that as you hung upon the cross, nailed, dying a sinner's death, dying the most despicable death possible, the most painful death possible, so that you could show each and every one of us that we are worth it, so that you could allow us the privilege of coming into your kingdom, of being your heirs. Lord, I pray that we don't simply wait to the end of our time to give our lives to you, Lord, but that lives be changed right now, that hearts be transformed right now in this moment, that your Spirit come and meet us and lead us. Carry us closer to you. We give you all praise, Lord Jesus, for your incredible sacrifice and your incredible love for us. It's through your mighty name I pray. Amen. Another opportunity to worship, and that's through our giving. You can go to lehighchurch.org/give, and you can give online. If you're here, you can drop your offering in the back in one of the bins or in one of the plates. And know that God doesn't desire in all of this your money, but He desires your heart. He knows that where your heart is usually where your wallet is. And if you're willing to give back to Him what He has already graciously given to you, He will take it, He will multiply it, and He will continue His mission to change lives and build His kingdom in our community. I'm so grateful for the generosity of this church and how you are willing to partner with us, because God is doing something, and He's doing something significant through this church, through this body, in this community. And I'm so grateful y'all desire to be a part of that. Can't wait to see you guys again next week. God bless.
Go ahead and stand with us, please.
Jesus, Lord of my salvation, Savior of my soul, send me out to the world, make you know. Jesus, the ones in need of rescue. Lead me, I will go. Send me out to the world to make you know. Send me out to the world. Wanna be your hands and feet. Wanna be your voice every time I speak. I wanna run to the ones in need. In the name of Jesus. Wanna give my life away, all for your kingdom's sake. Shine a light in the darkest place. In the name of Jesus. In the name of Jesus. Send me out, make you know there is hope for every soul. Send me out, here am I will go. Send me out, make you know there is hope for every soul. Send me out, wanna be your hands and feet. Wanna be your voice every time I speak. I wanna run to the ones in need. In the name of Jesus. Wanna give my life away, all for your kingdom's sake. Shine a light in the darkest place. In the name of Jesus. Wanna be your hands and feet. Wanna be your voice every time I speak. I wanna run to the one